Before we go any further, if you care about hard-earned historical knowledge that actually applies to real-world survival, do me a favor right now. Subscribe to Iron Age Instincts and share this with someone who still thinks modern gear automatically means better outcomes. What we're about to talk about isn't nostalgia. It's field-tested reality that kept millions of soldiers alive in conditions most modern campers would quit within a night. Most people assume World War II-era sleeping systems were crude, uncomfortable, and inferior to today's ultralight, high-tech setups. That assumption collapses the moment you actually study how these systems were designed, issued, and used in the field. World War II sleeping bag arrangements weren't about comfort marketing or weight-bragging rights. They were about one thing only: keeping human beings alive, functional, and combat-capable in brutal environments for weeks or months at a time. Why did World War II armies design sleeping systems as layered survival tools rather than single-purpose gear? The biggest difference between World War II sleep systems and modern sleeping bags is philosophy. Today, people buy one bag rated for one temperature range and assume it will solve the problem. World War II armies didn't think that way. They issued layered systems that could be reconfigured depending on weather, terrain, and mission length. A United States Army soldier, for example, wasn't relying on a single bag. He had a wool blanket, a canvas or treated cotton shell, sometimes a down or fibre-filled bag, and often a ground pad or improvised insulation beneath him. This mattered because weather is unpredictable, especially in wartime Europe or the Pacific. Soldiers could sleep under just a blanket in mild weather, combine blanket and bag in cold conditions, or wrap everything together in extreme cold. If one component got wet or damaged, the entire system didn't fail. Modern gear often does. When a single modern sleeping bag loses loft due to moisture, it's effectively useless. During the Second World War, sleep systems actually managed moisture better than many of the setups we see today. Moisture is, well, the silent killer in cold environments, and those WWII designers really understood this deeply. They used natural materials like wool, which kept its insulating properties even when it was damp. Cotton shells, too, breathed better than a lot of the modern synthetic coatings, if you can believe it. Soldiers were taught to air out their bedding whenever possible, even if it was just for a brief moment, to drive off moisture from sweat and condensation. Now, if you compare that to many modern sleeping bags, you'll find they often trap moisture inside waterproof breathable shells. These work great in theory, but honestly not so well in prolonged field use. WWII systems, on the other hand, just assumed you would get wet, cold and dirty. And they still functioned. Wool blankets could be shaken out, dried near a fire, or even slept in while damp without catastrophic heat loss. That alone, I'd say, is a lesson modern survivalists really ought to take seriously. One thing that's often overlooked is why ground insulation mattered more than sleeping bag loft in WWII's doctrine. One of the least understood aspects of those sleeping arrangements is just how much emphasis was placed on insulating from the ground. Soldiers were instructed to use shelter halves, brush, straw, pine boughs, or even spare clothing beneath them. The fact is, heat loss to the ground is far greater than heat loss to the air, and WWII manuals hammered this point home again and again. You know, modern campers often obsess over sleeping bag ratings, and well, they tend to neglect ground insulation. But let me tell you, World War II soldiers knew better. A mediocre bag with proper ground insulation, it actually outperformed a great bag laid directly on frozen earth. This principle is honestly timeless. Anyone applying World War II methods today should, without a doubt, prioritize layered ground insulation before thinking about upgrading to those expensive modern bags. Now, let's talk about how shared warmth and disciplined routines really amplified effectiveness. Another uncomfortable truth for today's individualist gear culture is that World War II soldiers, well, they often slept close together by necessity. Shared body heat in foxholes, tents or shelters dramatically increased warmth and, frankly, survivability. This wasn't accidental. It was, in fact, standard practice. Units learned pretty quickly that spacing out for comfort led to hypothermia and fatigue. Routines also mattered, you know. Soldiers changed into dry socks before sleep whenever possible, loosened their boots to restore circulation, and avoided overheating before bedding down. Overheating caused sweating, which in turn led to dangerous heat loss later. These habits mattered just as much as the gear itself. Modern survivalists can apply this by managing sweat, clothing layers, and sleep spacing instead of relying on technology alone. So, let's talk about how you can actually apply these World War II sleeping principles to your own modern survival and preparedness, yeah? You really don't need any original World War II gear to make use of these lessons. The key is to start with layers rather than relying on just one single solution. For example, you can use a wool blanket alongside your sleeping bag. Just remember, not inside it. Also, it's best to focus on breathable outer layers instead of going for a fully sealed shell, unless the conditions really, truly demand it. And don't forget to build your ground insulation deliberately, using either natural materials or foam pads layered together. Practice moisture discipline. Air out bedding daily, even if it's just for a few minutes. Sleep slightly cool rather than warm, to prevent sweating, you know. If you're operating in a group, plan sleeping arrangements that conserve heat, rather than isolating individuals unnecessarily. Even modern emergency kits benefit from this mindset. A wool blanket, a poncho, and a simple pad often outperform an expensive ultralight bag when conditions turn ugly. WWII Systems worked because they were adaptable, redundant, and brutally honest about human limitations. Why do WW2 sleeping arrangements remain relevant for serious historians and survivalists? Well, these systems weren't theoretical. They were refined through attrition, failure, and hard lessons learned in frozen forests, muddy fields, and bombed-out cities. They kept soldiers alive long enough to fight another day. That alone, I'd say, demands respect and study. For serious historians, understanding these arrangements offers insight into daily soldier life that rarely gets discussed. For survivalists, it's a reminder that simplicity, redundancy, and discipline often beat technology. If this kind of grounded, historically accurate analysis matters to you, subscribe to Iron Age Instincts and share this video with someone who still believes newer automatically means better. History doesn't reward assumptions. It rewards those who pay attention.